Hello everybody, welcome back. Session 2 then. So first up we have Margaret Duff, and she's going to speak to us about, I think, CPI. It's a core imaging library. So I'll hand you over to Margaret.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. As James said, I'm Margaret Duff. I'm part of the Tomography and Imaging group in scientific computing, and I'm going to talk to you about the core imaging library and all of these words here. And I am here representing a bigger group, so these are all our smiling faces, our names are below, and lots of thanks to people who fund us, including CCPI and CCP Synabi, and universities and things down the bottom. Brilliant. So, what am I going to talk about today? I'm talking about the core imaging library, which was built for CT, but works for other inverse problems as well. So it's an open source Python framework for CT, and it's got tools for reading, pre-processing, reconstructing, and visualizing CT data. But the thing that I want to talk about today is the third bullet point on the screen, which is it's got optimization tools for iterative reconstruction methods with a focus on challenging data. And what I mean by challenging in this case is noisy data, multi-channels, that could be in time, or it could be energy, or non-standard geometries. And I'm going to talk about 3 different things in the next 15 minutes. I'm going to talk about a rich tomography case, so a hyperspectral case. I'm going to talk about something we call the still stochastic framework, which is doing iterative reconstruction in some way that's with increased speed and efficiency, and it links to what Edo talked about earlier with the Petric challenge. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about a motion-compensated MRI example. Brill. So let's start with the rich tomography case. So this is data taken from IMAT at ISIS. So this is target station 2, and here's IMAT down the bottom here. So one thing that we can do on IMAT is that neutrons are released in pulses, and by using detectors that detect not just where the neutrons hit the detector, but when they hit the detector, we can get information on energy. So the faster the neutrons, the more energy they have. Why is this exciting? Well, here you can see different elements, and you can see iron here in the green, and this is wavelength on the bottom, and we've got attenuation down the side. So at different wavelengths, neutrons are attenuated by the iron by different amounts. And in some places, we have these sharp changes, which are called Bragg edges. And the location of these Bragg edges can tell us what material it is, but it also can give scientists information on things like stress and strain and stuff like that. So reconstructing them is useful. So in this particular experiment, there were we used foil cylinders filled with metallic powder. There were 5, and then there was 1 empty one. Yep, imaged on IMAT, here's some data. And if you reconstruct using a standard method, so a filtered back projection method, then, and this is different energy levels, so different angstrom, different energy levels, you get really noisy data. So neutron data is noisy anyway, because you have quite a low flux. And then if you split that flux over multiple energy channels, you just don't get very much data, which means that your reconstruction is really noisy. So what we did with SIL is we added in extra information into the reconstruction. And the extra information that was added was that in space, we want things to be piecewise constant with sharp jumps, so sharp edges. And we add that in using something called TV, which is total variation. And we say in this sort of total variation norm, in this sort of measure, we want things to be small in the total variation. And so that's adding in extra information to the problem. And we do something similar in the energy channels. We say this time we don't want things to be piecewise constant with jumps. We want things to be piecewise linear with jumps. And we do this by something called TGV, which is total generalized variation. So adding in these 2 bits of extra information, we get a much better reconstruction. The paper's down here if anyone's interested. You can now see the difference between the different cylinders. You can now tell them apart. And if you look at this pixel here with these 2 red lines, we can map that over the different energy channels, and you can see, so this green line here is the what we expect for iron. This is the theoretical values. The filter back projection, you'd never be able to tell that was iron. But with the TV and TGV reconstruction, you're getting much closer to those theoretical energy profiles. Brilliant. So that example was a sort of very quick overview of why you should be excited by iterative reconstruction methods, why they're useful. The next part gets a bit more mathematical, a bit more technical about how we implement some things in our software and how we give options for increasing sort of speed and efficiency for large data sets. So, this was a project that's been going on for a long time. So there's hackathons back to 2021. All of these people involved, and you have to thank to everyone there. So imagine that we want to minimize some function f. So this could be that we want our reconstruction to match our data, and we want that thing, and we want to minimize this. This is our objective. We often do this by something called gradient descent, and this involves looking around, seeing in which direction we can descend most quickly and taking a step in that direction. So this is taking a step in the steepest descent direction. But sometimes calculating this gradient, this f, is expensive, especially if there's lots of data involved, or the data is very large. And so what stochastic gradient descent does, you might have heard of it in sort of a machine learning context, but it's wider than that, is that you split this f into multiple fi's, so this sum of fi's, and instead of each time you take a step, you look round and you choose the steepest descent direction for all f, you instead just choose a random index ik of all of your indices and compute the gradient in just that function. And just take a step decreasing that function. And the idea is you're doing sort of an nth of the work of calculating the gradient of the full f by calculating the gradient of just the fi. So I'm now going to say this all again, a bit more complicated. So now, instead of just minimizing f, we're minimizing f plus g. And this could be, this says, oh, I want my reconstruction to match my data. This g here could be, as we had before, a TV norm or a TGV, something like that, something that adds extra information to the problem. And in our software, we've got at least 3 different algorithms we can use to do things like this. If everything's differentiable, we can use gradient descent. If not, we can use something called ISTA, iterative soft thresholding algorithm. And we can use FISTA as well, which is an accelerated version. Don't worry about the details, okay? What we can do as before is replace that f with a sum of fi. And again, we want to avoid computing that full gradient because it might be expensive. And we select a random index ik and compute the gradient for just that iteration. And everywhere that we had a gradient of f in these 3 algorithms, we've replaced it with the gradient of fik. So with those deterministic algorithms that we had before, adding in this randomness with this choosing and sampling an index and replacing that gradient, we've now got 3 new algorithms: stochastic gradient descent, proximal stochastic gradient descent, and accelerated proximal stochastic gradient descent. So we've with one change, we've got 3 algorithms for free. And this is the idea of our software implementation, is that we don't directly implement our stochastic algorithms. We take our normal deterministic algorithms, we add in some stochasticity in the function that we want to minimize, and that gives us new stochastic algorithms. So SGD, stochastic gradient descent, is normal gradient descent with a stochastic gradient function, which, when you take the gradient, chooses an index and makes a stochastic gradient. And we can go one step further of choosing different approximations of those gradients. So instead of just choosing one index, we could maybe have a sum of indices, we could have some memory involved, we could take some averages. So we've also got different stochastic variance reduced ways of choosing these stochastic gradients in here. And this gives us lots of different algorithms, including SAG, SAGA, SVRG, LSVRG, so things that occur in the optimization literature. And just as an example, this is a PET simulation of a thorax, simulated using SURF, software from CCB Cinnaby. We've simulated Poisson noise. We've partitioned the data into 32 data sets, so that F is split into 32. We're adding TV regularization in, so that piecewise constant sharp edges. And you can, so this compares with an optimal reconstruction from 500 data passes of SPDHG. So we've run one algorithm for a very long time and say this is our best guess. And now we run all the algorithms again and see how quickly we're getting towards that best guess. And FISTA, which is our deterministic algorithm, takes sort of 55 data passes to get to this line, whereas proximal stochastic gradient descent is only taking sort of 10 or so. So the idea is that these stochastic methods can increase that speed and efficiency of our reconstruction. And mentioning again what Edo mentioned in that first talk this morning, PET reconstruction challenge, the PET rapid image reconstruction challenge by CCP Cinnaby, example implementations and all of the top 3 submissions use the stochastic framework in some way. And sort of the vanilla SIL with custom step sizes and preconditioners came joint second. So this was a team led by Sam Porter from UCL. Brilliant. Okay. Last example, a few minutes. So this last example, I've shown you a tomography case, a PET case, and now I'm going to show you an MRI case. So this is joint work with Letizia, who did a grad placement in our group, Chris Tellemans and Christoph Kolbitz. And the motivation of this is that if something moves while you're taking an MRI scan, then you get motion artifacts. So in this case, this phantom here is moving from the right to the left. So this yellow line is always in the same place, and it's moving that way. So that's time step 0, time step 1, time step 2. Oh, I'm going to knock over the lights. Excellent. And if you sort of squash all the data, assume there was no motion, and reconstruct, you get this messy case down here. But if you take into account the motion, you get a much nicer image. So, problem with motion causes motion artifacts. Another thing we can do if we can deal with these motion correction is, imagine you're taking an MRI of the chest. Patients breathe. It's really annoying, okay? But doctors prefer them alive in general. So, so one of the things that you could do to reduce motion is you could only take data in the same place in the sort of cardiorespiratory cycle. So maybe you only take data when the patient's breathing in. If you can take data the whole way through the cardiorespiratory cycle and correct for the motion using software rather than physically the patient holding their breath or someone pressing stop go on the record device, then you can shorten the acquisition times. So, motion correction, brilliant, but it requires iterative optimization algorithms, and these can be computationally very expensive. Okay, so, very expensive. We're going to do a stochastic method again. And what we're going to do is divide our data, y, into m motion states. Okay, so our data y has become yi. Okay, and we're going to build up our sort of equation of what's going on. So this x is what we want to reconstruct, and this is our nice data with no motion in there. First of all, I'm going to add in a operator C, which is just an MRI-specific thing that involves the coils in an MRI machine, so you don't have to worry about that too much. The next thing's important. This is motion compensation. This takes our nice reconstructed image to the place it is at time I. So that does the motion. Then I do a Fourier transform, which is the MRI bit. MRI machines do a fancy Fourier transform. And then I've got a sampling operator which says, where am I measuring at time I? And I'm going to write this whole thing as ki of x. Okay, so yi is ki of x. And to solve this, I do the following optimization problem. I say that at each time step I to m minus 1, I need my reconstruction x to match my data. And I add in TV regularization, so that piecewise constant plus sharp edges. And I can write this like this, okay? Which is similar to what we had before. Right, I've got 2 algorithms on the board. You don't need to understand them at all. What I just want you to take away is that in this one, PDHG, primal dual hybrid gradient, you do something for each motion state. For I equals 0 to n minus 1, you calculate this thing. Okay? For the stochastic version, so stochastic primal dual hybrid gradient, you select just one of these motion states, you calculate that thing for just that motion state, and you don't do anything for the other motion states. So you're doing for this deterministic one on the left, you're doing m times as much as for this stochastic one on the right. And the mathematicians have proven with the right step sizes and blah, 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 it converges in some cases. Okay? And indeed, by comparing PDHG and SPDHG, for that phantom that we had, in just 10 epochs of SPDHG, we're getting quite a sharp reconstruction, whereas it takes up to 70 epochs of PDHG to get a similar result. It's quite blurry for 10. And there's a comparison with Pfister again, which is a deterministic algorithm. And this is cardiorespiratory motion on the right, and the cardiorespiratory in vivo whole heart MRI scan on the right. And you might not be able to see at the back, but PDHG is quite blurry here at 20 epochs, but SPDHG is giving quite sharp images. So image quality is maintained while reducing computation time with these stochastic algorithms. Brilliant. Excellent. So thank you very much for following me through those 3 examples. What I wanted you to get out of this talk was that the core engineering library is cool, it's useful. It's an open source Python package for tomography users, but also other inverse problems. I've shown you CT, PET, and MR examples. I've shown you an example of rich tomography, so the hyperspectral example, and I've shown you an area of current development in SIL, so the stochastic optimization. If you want to find out more about SIL, come and talk to us. There's our Discord and our GitHub down here, and this is a photo from our recent user meeting. Well, thank you.
Very nice, and very nice work there. I always can't help but hear why I, as a fellow Northerner, as a Geordie, in agreement with me, but there we are. Anyway, any questions?
That is a very interesting library. I'm not a mathematician. Now, what the library basically does is gradient optimization. So you've got a starting point, you want to go ideally to a global minimum,
yeah.
And that does it perfect. Could you use that for molecular dynamics in chemistry, for example, i.e. different applications, not only imaging, because it's also gradient optimization, if you see what I mean?
Yeah, so yeah, our optimization package allows for any forward operator. You basically need to be able to do a sort of a matrix vector calculation. We are mostly limited to linear operators, so I'm not sure how nonlinear your molecular system is. Yeah.
Thank you. Any more? One more.
So, as was mentioned, it's all about gradients. So, have you thought about using automatic differentiation to open up these methods a little bit?
Brilliant. Yeah. So so some of the functions that we use don't have gradients defined in all places. So things like the TV that I mentioned with the piecewise constants and sharp edges, or if you were doing something like sparsity, so you want to say that you've got some sparse information in your image, or your image is sparse in some basis. And in that case, you use other things like proximals or proximal conjugates. In terms of automatic differentiation, it's sort of, we've got projects hopefully in the pipeline about working out how things like how SIL can interact with libraries like PyTorch and sort of that interoperability to allow things like automatic differentiation. But at the moment, that's in the pipeline because trying to make PyTorch work with some of our projectors for CT is a challenge, but one we're aiming to look at in the next couple of years.
Excellent. Please thank Margaret again, and we'll move on to next